Fine. All right. All ready? Okay, I'm online. My name is Patrick Munch. I work for Siemens Industries, Inc., Water Technologies, Envirex products. If you've ever dealt with Envirex equipment, I basically know what it is, and I've dealt with it. So, right now I'm going to be talking to you about the new Scum pipes and everything. You've got 18-inch diameter Scum pipes going into your primary sedimentation tanks. As you can see here, they will be AMA actuated and operated. Once they're installed and operational, they can be operated by your SCADA system, or they can be operated remotely at the unit themselves. So during maintenance, they'll probably be or observing or greasing. There is a switch on the AMA actuator that can go from remote, off, auto, remote, hand, and off. Whenever you leave the site, you always want to make sure it goes in the remote. We don't have the AMAs installed at this time. They have not arrived, so I can't talk to you much about those. Scum pipes themselves are very simple. The situation will be, as you can see in this picture here, which you will have on your little handout as well, that these are a Warman gear operated unit. The AMA actuator will actually be programmed to do a forward skim, back skim, and then back to top dead center. Skimming will be a certain period of time determined by operations as far as forward skim and back skim, and then back up on top. So you're not filling the tank, you're not constantly flowing water into the system and having to pump it back to the head of the plant or into your digesters. So, now, that's the basics on it. We have on both ends, as you can see here, we have wall supports on both ends of the pipe that will support the unit. The weight of the pipe is designed such as that. In each unit we have, in each wall support, we have UHMW bearing pads. Used to be steel bearing pads, which would always be a problematic deal, especially steel pipe, steel bearing pads. You don't operate it, it will freeze. This one here will not. It's stainless steel pipe, and the bearing pads are UHMW. You also have a seal inside of both ends, so therefore water in the tank, the liquid level will be up about an inch below the openings or thereabouts. Therefore, if we didn't have a seal material, which I'll explain later, that water would seep around the pipe and constantly flow in. That is one operational check that needs to be done on a regular basis, is to look at the pipe to see if you have any constant water flowing through one or any of the Scum pipes to determine whether a seal is good or bad.
What type of seal is it?
These are, I believe they're called a high core seal, and okay, this here, the design is such that it has a steel rib here which keeps it up against the wall support. Going around and up on top there you have a stop block which both ends of that steel rib are supposed to be up against. So therefore, as the pipe rotates, that seal does not go underneath and start rotating with the pipe. Those steel ribs are spring steel. They're cut to length. That's the hardest part about getting the seals in and everything, but still can be done. So I believe they're still called high core seals, but still you can see the design on, you've got that picture there And there's better pictures inside the O&M manual. It's a long seal. Let's see here. Better describe it. You have flat part there. You've got an opening where your steel band is, and then your seal looks something like that. Therefore, this here will be up against the pipe. This here is your wall mount. It goes clear around the pipe. Then up on top, you have that stop block where that band inside there is supposed to stop at. So it confines that seal from, as the pipe rotates, the seal does not rotate with it. Is that clear enough?
Yeah, it's just also, if you have to change it out, what's involved in changing the seal out?
Okay.
You have to pull the whole thing out.
Now, unfortunately, on the non-drive end, you have stop collars, which are clamped, two-piece stop collars, which are clamped to the pipe itself. That's the easy one. You remove that clamp, and then you can pry that seal out. You'll probably have to have a lift, because on the very bottom, that's going to be where all the weight is, and you ain't going to be able to get that out unless you lift that. Once you get the top part out, then you slightly lift that pipe up in order to relieve the tension, then you can pull that out.
Okay.
In order to put it back in, you would start up on top, on one side, putting the seal so far away from that stop block, going around so far, lifting the pipe up. Now you don't use any sharp objects because this is hollow. You do not want to puncture that or rip it. Using a piece of wood in order to push it in without puncturing it. As you go around, you can push it in using duck butter, grease, whatever. I've used duck butter many a time. Grease is fine. A lubricant in order so it slides in. Then once you get down to here, you'll have to lift the pipe up slightly in order to get that around. Then you can drop the pipe down and continue on to the top. Making sure that that steel band on both ends, dead ends right there on that stop block. If you allow that steel band to go underneath it, it will allow that seal to rotate. And then once it rotates to a certain point, you've got it down here, you've got it crimped there, and you're going to have a leak point, and you've damaged the seal. You've got to redo it again. So, now the hard part is getting the gear off. Now, as you can see with that picture there, that this is an 18-inch diameter, inside diameter, machined steel gear. You have to remove the worm, the actuator, the worm and gear first. This portion here. Then removing the two stops which confine the gear from moving in and out. You also have 3 dogs. As you can see in this picture here, you've got the bottom dog. They're about 120 degrees off of each other. That pushes the unit, or pushes the pipe around. That's what the gear pushes against in order to rotate the pipe. You have to remove those. Then, with a lot of help and scaffolding because of the safety issue, you need to pull that gear off the wall mount, slide it down the pipe, and then you can access the seal. Same way with the other end. Once you get the seal in, then you gotta put that gear back on and then reassemble it the opposite direction. Now, the worm and gear don't have any good clear pictures of that, but you have to understand that you have to note how it's assembled and put it back the way you found it. Now, on the top mount stem coming down, this is a pillow block bearing. You have a brass bearing on top and bottom of that gear, of that worm. You also have up on top here welded stop blocks on this. And then on the bottom one as well, you have stop blocks on the sides. That's in order so that when you reassemble it, the worm is still in line with the gear. If you don't put these back together the same way, this is out of alignment. Do not take these off because they're put in there.
Are they welded in?
They are welded in.
Okay.
Bolt there, bolt there. So, I just tried to dismantle one and put it back together because I was going to look at the seal, but it was in the position I was in, it was too unsafe. Figured I couldn't get that gear off safely enough and put it back on. So, I didn't go around doing it. But this worm situation has to be removed first in order to remove the gear. So, but you got to remember the brass here and brass here spacers where, so they are there for a purpose so that you're not having steel on steel, and it's a sacrificial piece of material. Something that when it's pushing and pulling, that this is going to be riding on. So, I have dismantled these before, rebuilt them and everything. Also, you probably have to remove the AMA actuator. You may be able to take this off, unbolt it up on top, and then slide it out from the actuator. But this here is a separate unit from that, therefore once you unbolt this, get it outlined, this will fall down.
So if you pull the bolt out above the top bearing and leave that unconnected, looks like it'll slip out of that.
Right. It's
Okay.
the AMA actuator stem pipe is a female, and up on top here you have a male. And you've got one bolt going through it.
Yeah, I see that, okay.
So you may be able to just leave the AMA actuator in place, temporarily having it bolted up there, take this off, unbolt this, and then slide this off, keeping it nice and clean on the grease line, setting off to the side, pulling this out of the way, unbolting it there, and then pulling that assembly out as well. Either that or you could probably keep these together and slide it out. It's not that light of a unit.
Okay.
But again, scaffolding would be best. Working off of ladders is very precarious in the position you're in. So, now, AMA actuators are hand wheel operated. We'll discuss that at a later date once they're installed so you can play with them and everything. Seal material I've gone through. Location, importance, levelness, okay. The pipes are to be level. I've checked them for level. Elevation wise, as long as the elevation, I've checked as close as I can as far as elevation. The water level, again, as designed. Your opening is supposed to be about 1 inch below the opening during normal operation. That will change depending upon your flow. Now, when I do get them set up, the operation will be such that they will be situated like this, about 1 inch below, during a skimming operation. You may have to change that in order to get whatever type of skimmings you need to remove, whether it's thick skimmings, thin skimmings, or whatever, in order to operate properly. I don't know what that is until you start operating, and 1 inch may be too much or not enough. So therefore, we'll go through the operation of changing the set points at a later date. But normally, it will rotate to a forward skim, sit there for so long a time, maybe 1 or 2 flights, which would be 5. Your flights run basically about 2 feet per minute, about 5-10 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at the most. 2 minutes, 5 minutes may be enough, depending upon how much water you want going through here. Then it will go through a back skim. Back skim can be very short. So, you've got, these are always on the tail end, as this picture shows. Again, skimming can be determined by 1 or 2 flights pushing material up against it. I don't know if you'll have a spray system accentuating that movement of the skimmings up on top or not. Some places do have a spray system that will push that material to the scum pipe and keep it there.
What would be your recommendation? With or without?
Depending upon how much skimmings you got and how much it is. I have no idea, some places prefer it. It's a use of water, plant effluent water, and everything. I don't know exactly how close those flights come. I think they don't come very close to it. And depending upon the style of skimmings you got. More than likely, depending upon the distance of your upper mid shaft here and the scum pipe, may determine you may want to have some sort of a spray system pushing the material, keeping it up against the scum pipe. That would be a much more positive, and then quite possibly it may come on just prior to the skimming situation. Just to push it there and everything, getting it prepped, it would skim, and then once it back skims, the spray would shut off. Something like that. Again, set collars. The gear is 1 set collar, and then on the other end you have that clamp system on the other end. That eliminates from the pipe from rotating, moving back and forth, because without the set collars it will screw in or out just like any other screw. I don't know exactly direction. Maybe it's a right hand screw, maybe it's a left hand screw. But either way, as the pipe screw rotates, it has a tendency of wandering one way or another. And you don't want that pipe to wander any further. It also keeps the seals in place so that they don't come out. Now the bearings themselves, again, inside the pipes, both ends. And that is, let's see here. Okay, on both ends you do have, like I said, a 3-point UHMW wear strip. It's all one piece and it's all machined properly. I believe the flat looking at it flat, you may look at seeing it this way, and come up over, and then, whereas these two ends would dead end up at a stop block. And you would have, I believe these may be a little bit longer for a 3-point. No, okay, the top one, you have one here in the middle. So actually it's a 4-point deal. Bottom, about 120 degrees, and then very top. It's all UHMW. Also, what's been installed since I have done this before last time is that you have a grease system on the gear itself, and that is shown on these pictures here. Since this is machine steel, even though this mounting plate is stainless, we found that in the past these have frozen, bound up, and they figured out a greasing system for that gear. So therefore, as it rotates, it's on a grease area. When it's installed, the entire inside of the gear itself is supposed to be greased, and then once a month you got 4 points to grease. You got the 2 bearing pads on the worm, and then 2 grease fittings on the gear itself. That's just greased once a month, preferably when it's in operation. In that situation, you can.
So let me ask you a question then. So this grease looks like it's going into where the bearing's at, and not onto the gear itself?
It goes, okay, the design there.
Because it's UHMW, you don't really
Okay.
grease at it.
UHMW, if you look at it, this is the wall mount.
Okay.
Now, you have UHMW here on the inside for the pipe. Now, that gear sits on the outside. Something like that. Grease, you got a grease hole there, and grease goes in, so you are greasing this area
Okay.
where the gear rides on the wall mount.
So you're not worried about greasing any of the gear at all, just you're gonna use whatever's in the water, whatever.
Right, correct. But you still should, since the worm is steel and the gear is steel, you still want to keep a coating of grease on them. Otherwise, if you don't use it, you wipe off all the grease, have it nice and bright and shiny. After salt air or whatever, it will rust together. So, having the worm and gear greased as well, making sure you have a good coating of grease on that gear. Now, since you've got grease fittings up on top, normally I would say after many, many years, after some people have gone off on their permanent vacation called retirement, the worm and gear the gear may have worn out in a certain area. Okay, normally I would say you could rotate that around to 120 degrees and use a fresh area, because you're only using a certain short area of arc under normal operation.
So that gear these dogs are connected to that gear.
Okay.
So you say it'll be rotated from one dog to the
Now,
other or tied in?
that, if you look on, okay, here's your pipe. Here's on the gear itself. You have a block there, you have a bolt coming up through there and a nut up on top. That is inside this little cubby hole. As you, doesn't show it very well there. Let's see. Okay. This picture here will show your dog there. It used to be a square dog. We've got a round one that fits inside this hole, this little cubby area. That's the only connection point of the gear to the pipe. Therefore, when the gear rotates, it will push those 3 points around, pushing the pipe around. So if you remove those 3 dogs, or they break for some odd reason,
That's a weak point there.
then they're stainless steel bolts. There shouldn't be that much stress on the unit.
Okay.
But if you wanted to check to find out what is binding, I have taken those 3 dogs out and rotated the gear, see if that was binding. If that was not binding, then it's the pipe that's binding. But that was with the old style steel, and they were misaligned. The pipe was slightly out of alignment, and therefore the pipe was binding on the bearing blocks. With the UHMW, you should not have that much of a problem.
What type of clearance do they have between the pipe and the UHNW? Is it very... tolerance is not that close? Or?
No, it's not really, it's not a tight tolerance. They say that you have an awful lot more leeway for out of alignment. And it is a slight wear point. So they do flex, they're not steel on steel or whatever, so therefore you have a bit more flexibility there as well. Okay, lubrication wise, we'll go through the actuator itself. Actuator is basically non-maintenance. It's predominantly maintenance free. Book says just check for the paint job so it doesn't corrode. Greasing these is a monthly basis with a good grease, good lithium base, #2 grease. I'm sure you guys, maintenance guys, has well stocked of some good grease and everything. So if a tank is out of service for a long period of time, I still recommend that you operate the actuator at least once a month and grease it. Again, because of the bearings, anything with a bearing you should operate it. Motors have bearings in them. Anything that is situated with a bearing and it's going to be down for greater than a month, 6 months or whatever, you should still operate the unit at least once a month. That lubricates all the bearings, keeping it nice and peeled. Eliminates an awful lot of flat spots. I know it's not in the book. I go by storage requirements. Whenever something is stored, bearings and drives, that you need to operate those once a month just to keep the bearings from flat spots and operating properly. So I found that if they're down for long periods of time, then you want to start them up, something's wrong. So if you keep, somebody just goes in there, operates it once a month, forward, back, greases it, and that's it, that's fine. That's all you need to do. That's the only greasing area that you have to look at, is on the gear end. So, just a number of shots, and I do recommend that when you do grease them, you can put it in hand operation. As one guy is greasing it, it goes through the back skim, forward skim, then the back skim while you're greasing it, and then top dead center, and therefore go through all 4 points going back and forth. Therefore, the entire area that's going to be operated is greased.
Can, the over greasing, will it push the seal out or anything like that?
No.
Okay. It just
See,
might-
we're not have the seal area is here.
It's underneath the bearing then.
Right.
Okay.
And you're greasing here.
Yeah, okay.
This area here. Grease will probably go out that and out that way. Yes, it will make a mess.
Yeah.
And then on here, you'll be greasing this area and this area here. So you're not going to be blowing the seals out by over greasing it. And depending upon how much pile of grease you want inside there, as to once a year or whatever, whenever you take a tank down, you do need to go through this, making sure all the bolts are nice and tight, and just normal situation, making sure everything is well greased and operating properly, especially before you put it back into operation.
Yeah.
You make sure it operates fine. Kind of bad that you greased it, it's operating before you take it down, then you're 6 months down the road, you want to put it back to get into service, and nothing works. During that 6 months, you could have repaired it. So, but yeah, this here is not a problem as far as over greasing. Okay. Inspections, basically visual inspections on a regular basis by operations. One way is to how often, if all scum pipes are upright, but you have a flow of water going through the pipe into your scum trough and everything, that is where you're going to have to find out approximately what is leaking. Quite possibly one of these is worn out or whatever, or for some reason it's rotated, it's damaged, it's leaking, because water level will be up here, it will be leaking around here, or whatever. We have to inspect to find out which end is leaking. Especially if you got a tank down and you got water dripping all over the place and everything. All seals, even going this way, it should stop it at the seal. So when the water is flowing one way or the other, and this tank is down, but you have constant dripping of water through there, then one of those other active seals is damaged. Therefore, you have to repair it. Schedule it for next tank going down, if you can locate which seal is bad. Normally you can, by looking inside the pipe in order to see whether it's where it's bubbling out. Noting where the liquid is. These are supposed to be level and everything. So, same elevation, and only a good flow will probably flow it through. Inspecting, making sure the worm and gear is still intact and everything. I don't really care much for covered tanks because everything is called out of sight, out of mind. But you do need to inspect these on a regular basis to make sure everything is working fine. Viewing the skimming operation on the semi-regular basis is something else. Looking at what kind of skimmings you got, maybe you need to readjust your endpoints. You may be dumping more water out during certain periods of time that you don't need to, decreasing the number of skimmings during the day. Some places only skim once a day, depending upon how much material is collected up on top and everything. That is all determined as to how often you need to skim. Well, let's go back through this here, see if I missed anything. And by the way, if you got a question like you've been doing, interrupt me. I prefer doing that than saying, I'll deal with it later, because by the time I deal with it later, you've probably forgotten it. I don't mind. Okay, now, let's see here. Going back to 1, it's always on the tail end, easy, precise adjustment, hand wheel or motor operated. These are motor operated units. Operation main, check worm and gear for meshing, no binding or excessive looseness. That way you look at it as it's operating, you can actually view to see whether that worm is moving any. It should not be moving within its stops if it's properly secured. If for some reason one end or the other is broken loose, then one end will probably be flopping in the breeze, and you'll be able to see that by becoming out of alignment. Another indication on the AMA actuator, you do have an over torque system. If one unit is always over torquing in a certain position, you'll have to find out whether the worm and gear is meshing. Again, if it's binding, the pipe is binding, or the gear is binding, or the worm is binding. Or maybe somebody set the torques too low, because these are 18-inch diameter. It's going to take a certain amount of torque in order to move those things around.
Do you ever have a problem with solids getting into the worm drive and the gear? Cause that to over torque?
Depending upon the style of solids that get in there, normally the type of solids I've seen in a primary, it's oils and greases that usually lubricate it, other materials that usually float, female accoutrements usually are plastic or something light. You get enough material in there, such as a panty shield or a diaper or something, it may bind it up, yes. You know, people always flush down the toilet out of sight, out of mind, whatever they can. If it's light enough to float, it can get into there. So, again, inspecting it to see whether you've got any dangling stuff. The amount of hairs and ropes that I've seen in the primary could quite possibly bind that up. That's just fibers, hairs that people flush down the toilet, accumulate in a rope because of the movement of the water, can get into there and bind it up. Just like on your drives themselves, the drive chains, if you see how much garbage those things collect over a period of time. You know, you lift up the chain guard and there you got a big pile of garbage. Stuff that's been brought up by the chain. That can, yes, bind it up. Therefore, you got to just figure on cleaning it up or whatever. And grease is a very good magnet for an awful lot of things. Okay, lips of scum pipe openings are level. That I've done. Verify that drive machinery is aligned. Worm shaft should be aligned as long as it's kept within its stops. And reassembled appropriately with the proper wear washers. Verify drive is proper rotation. Now these are bidirectional drives. They'll go both ways. So, limit switches. Again, we'll go through the limit switches on the AMA actuators when they get here. The forward back skim limit switch as well as the over torque limit switches on both ends. Check oil and gear reducer, you don't have to worry about that. Don't worry, we'll discuss that later. Operating position depends upon scum accumulation at each pipe. Again, depending upon short circuiting of the flow into individual units. You can have more skimming material in one tank versus another tank, depending upon the distribution system. I've seen it done. So, the skimming on one tank may be more than on another tank. Again, it's a visual thing that you have to determine as to how often you want to skim in one tank versus another. If your flow is even into all 10 pipe tanks, then quite possibly you alternate one versus the other and then on down the line for skimming purposes. Yes, remove any large floating debris before it enters the pipe to avoid clogging. Quite possibly with 1 inch going down, any large floating material such as boards will not go up over the weir and everything. So it's stuff like that you have to look at what's come down the pipe. You never know what's coming down the pipe. Can be an awful lot of things. I've seen an awful lot of things coming down those pipes besides rocks and other debris. Floaters, big floaters. Now I'm not going to describe the floaters I've seen. Okay, adjust the limit switches as required. Again, once it's in operation, reviewing the O&M on the AMA actuators, you can adjust how deep both ends will be skimming.
Can you do that live?
Yes.
Yeah.
All you need to do is put it in, take it off remote, put it in off. Actually, you may want it in hand, operating it. Okay, you go to 1 skim, you flip a switch on it as far as the direction you want to go. You go a little bit further to where you want it with the hand wheel or back, and then you reset it again. Fairly simple.
Oh, from the actuator.
From the actuator itself. Just don't drop any equipment because you have to remove caps in order to do this. Don't drop anything in the drink. But yes, AMAs are very easy to operate. They're not, I believe some of them have gone to the remote operation such as Rotork has, but this system here I find is quite easy to operate as long as you know exactly what you're up to. Okay, normal operation when pipe isn't skimming, check inside the pipe at open end for leaks. Leaks mean either the pipe seal or wall end support is loose or out of position. Retighten the end support bolts. First to rule out wall seal. Now, the wall seal itself, to let you know about that, is a marine grade plywood. And I was told by the contractor, so you have your plywood here, your steel plate here, and you got your wall. Exaggerated, but I did find that one piece of plywood was not up against the deal, up against the wall. Now, what the contractor did, where your hole opening is, they've actually put a massive amount of caulk. So, and then they tensioned it down. This is a marine grade plywood, so therefore as the water, as you have it filled up, the water will make that swell up and seal even better. But yes, that is a part there. If for some reason this is broken loose, for some reason, then water can come up around behind the wall mount. Tensioning the drive end. It's not in the book, something I have found. Now, I don't know about this design here, but if you have to take this wall mount off or retension it, since this is plywood, you can torque these down nice and snug. But I found tightening that one down will bind it in the old design. So if you ever have to remove it, just remember getting these three here snug, tight. Then you get this one here snug, and making sure that that gear will rotate on its stand.
It warps it when it pulls in,
Yeah,
so it puts into a bind now.
right. I've fiddled around with those things enough to figure, okay, tighten all of them, I can't rotate the gear on the pipe mount. Loosening that one up, then I can rotate it. So I determined this one here makes a bind in it, especially if your wall is not nice and flush. So, just something I have found, especially in the old design. You may not have it in this design, I don't know. But still, you have that clearance of your gear around that pipe. So therefore, if you warp this plate here any amount, then it can bind up your gear. Retighten the end support bolts. Okay. If leaks continue, adjust, reposition the pipe seal. Looking at the seal, find out what's happened, where the seal, which seal is bad, and everything. One thing is that you will note that all the drive ends are there in one position, all the other ends are in one position on one wall. So you go, okay, is it leaking there? No. Okay, it's leaking on the drive end. It says, oh, darn. Because you got to remove that gear and everything in order to get that seal repositioned. Replace the seals. Look at, inspect the seals. Okay, maintenance on a monthly basis. You look at the bolts. It says check all bolts. Well, you're not going to do it in a light tank. Safety-wise, no. But you look at it, see if everything is kosher as well as you can. Check the above water bolts without climbing down in the hole and everything. Use a good grade of lithium-based #2 grease. Section for manual maintenance required on the actuator. Actuator, again, does not require any preventative maintenance on it. And that, again, we'll be reviewing later. Any shutdown. Hose out the pipe, clean up everything, check all bolts, grease worm shaft, bearings immediately after tank is drawn down, and do it before you put it back online, making sure everything is put back, is operating before you put that tank back in service. As far as I've seen, all longitudinal collectors, anything that's in a longitudinal connector can be operated in a drive tank. I would imagine that's the same way with our competitor chain and scrapers that you have out there. But that's up to them to tell you. In Virex, you can run those things dry. You can run these things dry. So, and I guess that's it. Any entry into a tank of this nature, standard procedure, monitoring, gas, confined space entry, especially these are covered tanks. They do have a tendency of accumulating noxious gases, so you'll have to take appropriate precautions. Whenever I'm down inside there checking things, I have to have a harness on, as well as we're monitoring the quality of air at this point in time. As you can see down there, not much you can see in this position here. You can see the wall mount down below, wood and everything. Mount You can see the grease lines going onto the deal and the general appearance of how it is after it's been freshly installed. As the actuator does rotate, the worm will either push or pull the gear around, which will rotate the pipe in the appropriate position as to how you set it, your end stops. And it should always end up with either, if you do it a manual mode, you should always end up to approximately top dead center as close as you can, whereas no water is constantly flowing into the unit. During greasing, again, you want to put it in hand position. You go, as you're moving into the forward position, you would be greasing one or two of the grease zerks, and then as you're going to the back position, you may want to operate depending upon how you want to grease them. But again, you should always grease the units on a monthly basis when it is in an operation mode, not in a static mode. Static mode would only put grease in one spot. Operating mode will spread the grease around. Here you have on each operator actuator, you do have a main switch as far as the three-phase motor is concerned. You also have on the actuator hand-off remote switch with push buttons for forward skim, back skim, and stop. But we'll go through that again later on. All four of these, actually all of them will be looking the same. You've got a right hand and a left hand. Based upon rotation, you always want to rotate them in the same direction for forward skim, which will be this way. Back skim coming back towards this area here. Your back skim can always be timed as a shorter period of time, since you're not skimming that much there. It's only cleaning up what's got caught in between the scum pipe and your old scum beach.
What kind of spare parts list do they have with this?
As far as I know, you've got UHMW, you've got a motor op 10 actuators. I don't know about extra worm and gears.
What about seals?
I don't know exactly. You may have a couple of seals extra on that one. Would be a standard issue. I have not looked at the spare parts. As far as spare,
what it is, we'll have to go through it.
right. And the contractor has all those. It's all marked spare parts. The only thing I know about as far as spare parts is the actuators themselves. Now, looking at the other end, you won't see a whole hell of a lot. Okay, now, we'll get over here sooner or later. This here is a seal. It's bent the wrong way. What they will be doing is removing this band out of here and rotating it around. So therefore it curves this way. It was installed wrong. This can be removed with care. Contractor knows about it. So it will pull out. Then they put it back in so that this bend is opposite of what it is. Now, as you can see, put it back to up there. You have a certain amount of end on these. Again, it's not supposed to be installed this way. It's supposed to be installed like this. So this is going to be, this area here is up against the wall mount. This area here is against the pipe. And you install it with the pipe installed. So, there's your seal. It's bent the wrong way. Contractor is going to be rotating it around the other way so it goes proper. That spring steel, we just pull this rib out, rotate it around, put it in, so therefore it will be bending this way. But that's the material. Inadvertently, they did damage one when they were installing it. So, I just have to get them a new one. So I thought I'd let you see this. Very important. These are all the grease lines and other things.
How'd they damage that? Like
Installing it, they probably were pushing on it and ripped it. That's a normal occurrence. Yeah. Okay, now this is a wall-mounted gear, and as you can see, you have the UHMW wear plate, wear strips on here with actually 4 points where it's going to be bearing surface. And your grease lines are basically here and here going inside that. The seal has not been installed in this one here. Seal goes inside this area here, stop block here, back around. The steel rib hits on these here.
So what fits onto that? The seal's there. What holds that seal in then? Does this?
This.
That's all that on
Yep,
that
that's
part
it.
there, huh?
Right.
But that looks wider than what the seal is.
Want to bring that over and see how it fits?
No, I see. Can that seal move back and forth in there? It doesn't cause a problem then, huh?
No. Okay, there is a, I believe that you have a UHMW, I believe on here. Since this is so wide,
Yeah, it's just
the design, I think, UHMW strip, the flat strips you see in there are situated here, then you have the seal.
Okay.
Up against there.
Now, do you run that UHW strip against this UHW, or do you run to the outside and keep the seal to this side?
Okay, I'd have to look at the drawings. This is a new design to me.
Okay.
And this here will go basically something like this here. With that metal strip up against there. And you would fit it around when the pipe is installed. This is not.
Yeah, take it on.
And you go from there.
These are the dogs that's installed to the pipe through here.
Right. Each pipe has 3 holes in it. Round up on top here, bolt going through there. And that's what actually rotates the pipe. These here are just so that the gear does not wander any further, which would kick it out of alignment here. As you can see on here, you have stops side on here, and then top and side here in order to keep these all in alignment. And you have your brass wear bushings, top and bottom.
Yeah.
Careful of that. Your grease fittings there, these will be removed and grease lines put on there.
If that worm gear does get out of alignment, is it pretty easy to get back, or?
Well, it depends on what happens. I have seen where they've put 2 of these on one, not realizing it. When I sent the photos to the office, because I had to dip down in order to see what was going on, they looked at the photos and says, yeah, the problem is you got 2 washers up on here, nothing there. That's what's binding it and wearing things down. So it's all machined and situated right now, so it operates nicely.
If this thing over torques, is it gonna shut down?
Basically, if it binds up, the Alma actuator will over torque and shut down, and give you an idiot light telling you it's over torque. And depending upon which direction it went, you got to figure out, okay, what's happened. You take your hand wheel and go the opposite direction, looking at the torque switches and seeing how hard it is to rotate and everything by hand. I've operated these manually, monitoring the torque as to where it is over torquing. You can actually see that on an actuator.
Yeah, we deal with that all the time on our bases.
Right. So if this is torquing out, again, to deduce things, you would take the dogs out and see if this is torquing out. If it's binding on, if it's the gear that's binding. If that's not what's binding, but it's still binding, therefore it's the pipe that's for some reason binding up. Process of elimination. Then you got to look at the how it's assembled. Did somebody reassemble things properly? Is everything realigned? Are the bolts nice and tight? Because if these come out of alignment, that'll kick this out and bind it up.
It is on the back side of the skimmer though, so it shouldn't have
Right.
it shouldn't have as much problem as if it was on the front side, but you're right, it could be a problem, but
Can become
Any
a
undertow
problem.
that goes underneath the pipe is just going to build up behind there, and
Right.
it's right where that sits.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because they had the problem even with the other stuff that got built up on the backside really heavily.
Well, that's
every
why you-
cycle it's going to go through a back sim.
Right.
Also.
You're supposed to do a back skim
They didn't do that.
to clear that out. Yeah, most
do
of them
that,
do not do a back skim. They just do a forward skim,
Right.
top dead center.
Right,
No worry about what is accumulating on the back side.
right.
And I've seen an awful lot of stuff accumulate there. Then you got to hand wheel it, back skim, and then hand wheel it back. And that's a hard deal to do. Wall mount that go between the stainless steel mounting plate and the wall.
Do you think that that wood will last quite a while?
Like I said, it's marine grade plywood, it's supposed to.
I think marine grade plywood not last very long too, from all the being in water all the time.
Well,
Are there any other materials that are recommended for instance?
well, the only other material I know of is neoprene that we recommend on it. I think most places prefer the marine grade plywood because it does swell. You don't have to really torque on it and everything, where neoprene would just sit there and create, if you can't get it tight enough, it just squeezes and you bind it up. With the marine grade plywood, you can again torque these here down, maybe the other ones, and then the last one you can just tension it up and let it swell up to seal it.
So, and when you were saying the one that you don't want to do is this guy down here?
I believe these three here.
Okay.
But I know that these three here, I've torqued those down, been able to spin that gear on there, and then torquing those on there, especially the outside one, has a tendency of shifting it quite possibly. This one here, since it's outboard so much, it would bow it, and therefore the ring in there would be deformed, and therefore it would bind up. There's your number 10, which is dead end, which does not require a seal. You don't need a seal on that one.
The seal does pretty good. I haven't done
Yeah.
like that. It's compressing up on there.
Oh,
that
yeah.
won't cause a problem.
No problem. And not that I've seen, and I've seen it go on all sorts of material, all sorts of diameters. As long as that seal is installed properly. I don't know where the other end mountings are. They've got them stored someplace. They're just a simple short pipe and everything. Just the pipe sits in there with the seal in there.
It has the same seal and the same plastic ring?
Yep. They have the
gear.
same type of the opposite end has the same bearing, UHMW bearing block, same seal. You just I don't think you put that UHMW in there because it's not as wide
Oh, okay.
and everything. So